Texas has become a pretty surprising battleground Senate race over the past few months, with polls essentially having Ted Cruz and his Democratic opponent Colin Allred neck and neck, with Cruz having a slight advantage of a couple of points throughout the entire process. But this just goes to show you that the state of Texas has changed dramatically over the past decade or so. So we're going to talk about the Texas race for Senate. We're also going to talk about the top of the ticket race in Texas between Trump and Harris, and ultimately how the two are inevitably going to be intertwined. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second, but first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. Ted Cruz is running for a third term in the U.S. Senate. He was first elected back in 2012 on the same exact ballot as Mitt Romney, performing about the same as him. And then, of course, in 2018, we had that incredible nail-biter election between Cruz and O'Rourke, which had Ted Cruz only win by less than 3 points. So this was much closer than even the polls had speculated this race was going to be, and a lot of that had to do with the blue wave environment. It also had to do with the fact that Beto O'Rourke ran a pretty exceptional campaign and campaigned in every single county in Texas, and I certainly think that contributed to the incredibly close margin. Now, if we take a look at the polls this time around, currently in the state of Texas, Ted Cruz leads Colin Allred by 4.5%. Now, if the polls are accurate, this would actually be Ted Cruz's second best performance when running for U.S. Senate. It would be better than his 2018 performance, but it would significantly be worse than his 2012 performance. And obviously, if Ted Cruz is doing better than 2018, that's certainly good news for him. But the fact that this race is down under 5 points is definitely concerning for Republicans. Now, if we take a look at the Trump-Harris polling in Texas, Donald Trump leads Kamala Harris by nearly 6 points, so Ted Cruz is lagging about 2 points behind. That's pretty concerning because if Donald Trump underperforms this polling, and let's say only wins the state of Texas by 3, that basically puts the Senate race in the toss-up category because Ted Cruz is not going to garner as much support in Texas as Donald Trump. If we take a look at the election map, for example, I think Ted Cruz is going to do even worse in places like Denton and Collin County outside of Dallas. He's going to do worse in places like Montgomery County, the Austin area, San Antonio. Pretty much every big suburban, metro, and ex-urban county, Ted Cruz is going to underperform. And he'll probably run about even with Donald Trump in the rurals, if not do about a point or so worse. So Ted Cruz is on track to underperform Trump across the board in Texas. Now, back in 2020, Donald Trump won Texas by 5.6%. This was the closest margin for any Republican victory in Texas since Bob Dole in 1996. But nonetheless, Donald Trump still won the state by over 5 points. If we go to the down-ballot Senate contest, John Cornyn, who is the incumbent senator, won his re-election bid by nearly 10 points. And he did that by overperforming Donald Trump virtually everywhere in the state. In the rural counties, but also, more importantly, in the suburban and ex-urban counties, the counties outside of Dallas. Donald Trump lost Tarrant County. John Cornyn won Tarrant County by 5 points. Places like that. John Cornyn was able to run the table. Ted Cruz does not have that sort of staying power in Texas. In fact, Ted Cruz is much more vulnerable than somebody like John Cornyn was back in 2020, who was basically assured victory. Ted Cruz is certainly not safe this time around. Now, while I think Ted Cruz certainly has the advantage, and I think at the end of the day he's going to win, this race is going to be a lot closer than it needs to be because the political geography in Texas is just working against Republicans because you have massive shifts to the left in a lot of the most populous counties, places like Dallas, for example, the Houston metro, Austin in particular, San Antonio. All of these areas have zoomed left over the past decade, and Donald Trump is going to certainly have to bear the brunt of that shift, but Ted Cruz is going to do worse in a lot of these counties. He's more toxic in a very liberal place like Austin, for example, Dallas, so on and so forth. Ted Cruz has a lot of the same problems as Donald Trump, but he's actually less popular, so his margin of victory is going to be even smaller. Now, so far, again, Colin Allred, I think has only led in one poll, and I think that was an outlier internal poll. Yeah, it was a morning consult poll from early September where he led by a point. That poll is obviously an outlier, but overall, if we take a look at the polling averages, when you look at 538, Cruz is up by just 4. RCP, he's up by 4. 270 to win, he's up by 4. And then the Hill and Decision Desk, Cruz is only up by 3. So the two candidates debated on October 15th. It was actually a very interesting debate. Cruz was very animated, very passionate. And I think it's really because this is the political fight of his life. 2018 was round one, and this is certainly going to be round two, because Texas is just not the state it was 10 years ago or back in 2012 when Ted Cruz won the first time around. It's gotten significantly more liberal. The urban areas have gotten significantly more blue. And as a result, races are just much more competitive. So Texas is not a state Republicans can continue to take for granted. Now, one of the reasons I think Ted Cruz is outperforming his 2018 numbers is because he's probably going to do significantly better in the Rio Grande Valley thanks to Donald Trump's coattails there. You know, back in 2020, Donald Trump swung a lot of these counties 50 points to the right, 40 points to the right, massive margins. He was able to flip Zapata County. You had super blue Starr County almost flip. So a lot of these counties are rural. You have some urban areas. You have cities down here like Laredo, McAllen, very blue areas, but also heavily Hispanic. And you saw huge shifts to the right among Hispanic voters in Florida, and you also saw it carry over in rural Texas. So I think Ted Cruz will benefit from that, even if he's not going to do as well as Donald Trump in the Rio Grande Valley. I still think that's probably going to be why this could be a 4-point race as opposed to a 2-point race as of right now. And again, places like Tarrant County are probably going to vote for Allred. I think Allred is going to do better in the Dallas area because, you know, this is where he's from. And also, it's just a leftward trending urban area in general. You know, we often think of Texas as a very rural, cowboy sort of outdoors state, but really a lot of the population is centered in these urban areas and outside of them. Dallas-Fort Worth has been growing rapidly over the past decade, a huge booming tech center there. You also have that in Austin as well, and that's been making these areas bluer. So for Ted Cruz, his real problem is the changing political landscape in Texas, coupled with just his personal unpopularity. Colin Allred is pretty much a standard Democrat. I think he has made a number of missteps when it came to the Second Amendment, for example, that certainly make him more toxic in Texas. And I think ultimately tying him to Harris is probably going to be the reason he loses, because Kamala Harris is certainly not popular in the state of Texas. She's going to lose Texas by several points, and so is Colin Allred at the end of the day. But again, going forward into 2030, for example, Republicans need to be smart about the candidates they nominate. I certainly don't think Ted Cruz is going to run for re-election. That could be the end of his political career. Republicans need to be smart about the types of Republicans they run here, and ultimately, they can't take the state for granted. They need to continue to hammer the campaign ads, and they need a strategy to win back suburbanites, because as it stands right now, the Republican Party of Texas is one of the most conservative Republican parties in the country. They're still able to win statewide, but the demographics of Texas will soon make that impossible. You know, by 2030, if Texas continues at this same rate, it's going to be a Democratic voting state. Now, a lot of pundits have said that for decades now, and, you know, certainly I think the calls for a blue Texas back in 2012, for example, or 2016 were very premature. But I think we're sort of nearing an inflection point in the state where Republicans have to really make fundamental changes in how they message the issues they champion in the state, or else they're going to lose it. So while I expect Ted Cruz to win in November by several points, the race certainly didn't have to be this close. Somebody who was sort of your average Republican probably would have outperformed Donald Trump. You know, John Cornyn probably would have won by 8, 9, maybe 10 points just like he did in 2020. Somebody like Ted Cruz, again, has all the baggage of Donald Trump and is personally unpopular, not just among Democrats and independents, but also some Republicans. And that's sort of a lingering issue that stems from, obviously, his 2016 campaign, but also just the kind of person that he is. He's not well regarded in Texas overall, and he's certainly probably the most unpopular Republican running there. So while Ted Cruz has these problems, he's still going to win. He's going to probably have the same exact county map as what we saw back in 2018, losing Tarrant County narrowly, obviously losing a place like Dallas, losing Williamson and Hayes, but probably still running decently strong in the rural parts of Texas, which are ultimately going to bail him out. So Texas really was the Hail Mary state where Democrats were banking on a pickup in the Senate, because as it stands right now, Democrats will lose the Senate. All they need to do is lose Montana and Ohio, and that's the Senate. But even if Democrats hold on to Ohio, that's still 51 seats for the Republicans. It doesn't matter who wins the presidency, the Republicans control the Senate. So the only way that Democrats can hold on to the Senate in a Kamala Harris victory scenario is also by somehow holding on to Montana, which at this point seems very, very unlikely. So as it stands today, the Senate is 52-48 for the Republicans. If Republicans somehow get a miraculous pickup in a place like Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin, that's going to certainly pad their victory. But this really is going to be the check on the Harris administration if she does end up winning the presidency. And so far, it seems like Democrats' efforts to expand into red states and knock out Republican incumbents like Ted Cruz ultimately will fail. The Democratic Party, I think, has stopped putting money into this race. Mitch McConnell really hasn't been funding Ted Cruz either, but you do have a lot of big liberal super PACs still putting in money for Allred. So Allred is massively outspending Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is probably going to win just because Texas is a Republican stronghold. Again, no Democrat has won statewide in Texas since 1994. So that just goes to show you how red this state is. Ultimately, I expect this streak to continue, but Republicans need to seriously invest in their operation in Texas and really reorganize to appeal to the new voters that are making up the state. You have a larger Latino population. You have a huge population of voters outside the state, some of whom are conservative, some of whom are more liberal, especially in places like Austin. So Republicans really need to work on focusing more on the economic issues rather than sort of these really right-wing divisive social issues. You know, those work in much redder states, places like Missouri, for example, Indiana, you know, Republican positions on abortion, so on and so forth. But in Texas, it's rapidly become a liability. So the party there certainly has to adapt if they want to survive. But anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.